Hi, everybody. At the suggestion of by Lana Dell, one of our compatriots, I'm going to talk about the public option plan for the broadband that Senator Warren has advanced as part of her agenda for the federal government, okay, if she's elected to the presidency. Uh, she notes that there are many areas of the United States underserved, okay, when it comes to broadband, and even underserved when it comes to the internet, okay, at large. Uh, she says, one of the best tools for unlocking economic opportunity and advances in healthcare, like telemedicine, is access to reliable, high speed internet. But by the way, can you hear me okay? I want to make sure there's no problem with my sound because I had a problem a bit earlier. So let me know if you can hear me okay. Great. Bonnie says I can be heard okay. Sounds perfect. So that's wonderful. Glad the technical problems have cleared up. So going on with Senator Warren said, with what she said, she said one of the best tools for unlocking economic opportunity advances in healthcare, like telemedicine, is access to reliable, high-speed internet. In the 21st century, every home should have access to this technology, but we're not even close to that today. According to the FCC, 26.4% of people who are living in rural areas of the United States and 32.1% of people who are living on tribal lands did not have access to even a minimum speed, um, um, even to a minimum speed of the broadband internet. And by minimum speed, she means 25 megabits but per second slash 3 megabits compared to 1.7% who didn't have access to this in the urban areas. And she says, given the notorious loopholes in FCC reporting, these figures underestimate the gap. At the same time, while urban areas may be more likely to have access to broadband, to fiber broadband, there are many residents who can't afford to connect to it. So there's an affordability problem too, even in the urban areas as well as the rural areas. Nearly 27% of households in Detroit and Cleveland had no internet access in 2017, and households with incomes lower than $35,000 comprise 60% of households without any access to broadband, despite the fact that they're making up just 31% of the national population. So Senator Warren then points out that we've had problems like this before. The private sector has failed us in this way before. That was in the 1930s when the electric companies were passing over rural communities that they felt would not be profitable for them, leaving the families living there literally in the dark. Just like the electric companies 80 years ago, she says. Okay, today's largest ISPs have left large parts of the country unserved or dramatically underserved. ISPs being, of course, companies such as Verizon, Comcast, and Cox, and so on. And she points out that not only have they deliberately restricted competition, kept prices high, and used their armies of lobbyists to convince state legislatures to ban cities from building their own public networks, but also the federal government has shoved billions of taxpayer dollars to the ISPs in an effort to expand broadband to the remote areas. But those providers have done the bare minimum with the resources they got from the federal government, offering internet speeds well below the FCC minimum. Now, to show you how unequal this is, okay, I want to make clear that some people have no such problem. I live, okay, in Ashburn, Virginia, which is not too far from DC. I've never really clocked it, okay, in miles, but 30 to 40 miles away, okay, from the DC border, and may not even be 30 miles. I don't know. I can get to DC over the chain bridge. Uh, anyway, I don't think it's more than 30 miles. So, uh, okay, so as a resident of this particular community, I have access to Verizon Internet or to Comcast Internet. I had a choice, okay, between the two. Recently, I've been able to sign on, okay, to the Verizon Internet, and I have not but 25 megabits per second, not 100 megabits per second, but I have internet that is rated at 1,000 megabits per second, both for upload and for download speeds, which is why my technical problems here have begun to clear up over the last 3 or 4 months. Uh, okay, I don't pay a fortune for this. I pay, regular internet rates. They amount to roughly $90 a month or so. There are many people, of course, who can't afford to pay the $90 a month, okay, because they live on much less, okay, than we do. And I might point out that we are not at all well off, but we still can manage to squeeze out that much per month to pay for internet, which is very reliable and very fast for most things we do. Much of the United States, okay, from the statistics that were cited by Warren, it's probably close to half of the United States don't have this kind of service. Of course, the internet these days is very, very important before business, very, very important for the economies of particular areas. And it would be for the rural areas too. And where, uh, if anybody ever promises a resurgence of the rural areas, one of the first things they talk about is providing broadband service to the rural areas. Okay, so Warren proposes to do that, and she has a pretty good plan to do that. I'm not going to go over the details of the plan, but what I want to point out is that she wants to have a public option to fix the problem. So, more specifically, she wants to make it clear in federal law that cities will have the right to build their own broadband networks because it's not clear, okay, in federal law, and the states have been banning cities from building their own broadband infrastructure because the giant telecom companies aren't for this. They don't want competition from the cities. Uh, she wants to provide an $85 billion federal grant program. Okay, and what these grants would be used for would be to help uh, telephone and electricity cooperatives, nonprofit organizations, tribes, cities, counties, and other state subdivisions through grants to build their own fiber internet, which would then, in some areas, compete with the giant companies that are there now, okay, and would, okay, in other areas provide service to unserved and to underserved areas, or to areas with minimal competition, where, for example, the private companies have a monopoly. Now, before I came out here, I used to live, okay, in Alexandria. Comcast had a monopoly there. I can tell you that the service we were paying for there when we left was up to about $188 a month. And when we came here, we first got from Comcast the same service for about $105 a month. So the cost of not having any competition to the residents of Alexandria, which of course is a more sizable city, than the area we live in now, was $83 a month at this time. That was the only difference. The only reason why Comcast was charging more was because it could get away with it. Okay. So anyway, with these grants, the federal government would pay 90 cents on the dollar for construction of the public internets, and okay, the applicants would have to offer at least one plan with 100 megabits speed. Uh, and these would have to be made available at a low monthly rate in return for getting these grants. And there would be a set aside of $5 billion also for tribes, and the tribal nations would be able to get 100% by federal grants. So those are the essentials of the plan. There are some other aspects which are important, including training, okay, as well. But that's the public option side of the plan. Okay, now here's what I want to ask. I don't want to go into too much detail on this. I was asked whether I liked her plan. My answer is I certainly like it better than what we have now. I like it a good deal better, okay, than what I have now. But what I would like to know is why she didn't go further and simply offer infrastructure that was government owned and completely government by government financed to all the local areas in the United States. Why not? It was the government who originally built the internet and who developed the technology for the internet. It was paid for at public expense. Somehow, because of the 80s and the 90s and politics during those areas, the internet was basically turned over to providers who in many areas were able to achieve a monopoly and to overcharge the public for internet services. Since the 90s, when the use of the internet began to be really widespread, there was no reason for the government to have done that. It could have offered the public infrastructure to all the local areas of the United States, free of charge. There was no barrier to that except for political barriers. It now does not have to live with the legacy private sector system than we have now. What is really the objection to just replacing the private companies with companies that are government owned? Why not? Why stop with a public option? What value do the private ISPs actually provide that that a set of public internet companies financed by the federal government would not provide? Now, there may have been some reason why in the past, okay, in other words, a belief that government financing was somehow limited, that it may have seemed to make sense to some people to turn over the internet to the private sector. Okay, but right now, um, I don't think it makes sense. I think the internet should be a public utility that is publicly owned. We could set it up, okay, so the government would not have the right or the capacity to interfere with the content of the internet. Its role could be made a completely neutral one, where it set up the infrastructure for a set of decentralized, okay, and also publicly owned companies to run. But the point I'm making here is, what value to the private internet companies actually offer to the people of the United States, and why should they have any further opportunity to profit off our backs? Surely, if the government set up uh, such a network, okay, of public companies, okay, throughout the United States, they would almost certainly be able to cut the internet costs of the users, but by as much as two-thirds. And users who are too poor to afford the internet could be granted use of it for free. So, why didn't Senator Warren go that far? Well, I think we all know why. As she declared very prominently not too long ago, I am a capitalist. I believe in capitalism, she said. Well, I'm going to say something. I am not, okay, an ideologue. I believe in what works best, at least cost to the public at large. I believe in what serves the public purpose best. And I don't think, of what I've seen of the development of the internet so far, that the public purpose was served best by turning the internet over to the private sector. So I think the government ought to take it back. And I think I know just the presidential candidate who might be able to offer such a plan to do that. And on that note, okay, I'm going to say good night. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this one. I'll be back tomorrow night with some more.